I never believed in ghosts, not really. But if you'd driven down Old Birch Road as many times as I had, in the dead of night, under the eerie glow of the moon through the twisted branches, you might have started to question your grip on reality, too. It started off as any other late-night trip, the darkness consuming my truck's headlights as I drove back from a friend's house. The night was particularly quiet, with no sound but the distant hooting of an owl and the occasional rustle of the wind through the trees. The radio had stopped working miles back, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the monotonous hum of the engine. As I approached the infamous stretch of Old Birch Road, the air grew inexplicably colder. My truck's heater was on full blast, but it seemed to have no effect against the creeping chill that slithered through the cracks of my old Ford. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. Suddenly, the headlights flickered. I tapped the dashboard, muttering under my breath about getting the electrics checked, but then something caught my eye, a figure standing at the edge of the woods, illuminated by the brief dance of my faltering lights. I slowed down, squinting through the darkness. The figure was impossibly still, its features obscured by shadow. As my truck crawled closer, the headlights steadied, revealing a young woman in a tattered white dress. She was barefoot, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders, covering her face. I slowed to a stop, my heart thumping wildly. The rules of the road and the tales my grandma used to tell clashed in my mind. Never stop on Old Birch Road. Do you need help? My voice came out more like a croak. She didn't respond. Instead, she started walking towards the truck, her movements fluid yet unnatural. As she came into full view, my breath hitched. Her feet didn't seem to touch the ground. Panic seized me, but before I could hit the gas, she vanished. Just disappeared, like smoke in a breeze. I blinked, rubbing my eyes, and peered into the rearview mirror. Nothing. The road behind me was empty. Shaking off the chill that had settled in my bones, I pressed my foot against the accelerator, eager to leave the unsettling encounter behind. But the atmosphere had shifted. The darkness felt thicker, clinging to the edges of my vision like a physical force. Miles passed in tense silence. I could feel every tiny hair on my neck standing on end. Then, another flicker of my headlights, and there she was again, this time standing in the middle of the road, her back to me. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching against the asphalt. "Hey!" I yelled out the window, my voice tinged with both fear and frustration. "What do you want?" She turned slowly, her face still hidden by her hair. When she finally lifted her head, my scream caught in my throat. Her eyes were hollow, empty sockets that seemed to stare right through me. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out at first. Then, a whisper, carried by the wind, "Follow me." Before I could respond, she stepped off the road, disappearing into the trees. Every instinct told me not to follow, to drive away as fast as I could. But my body didn't obey. It was like I was being pulled by an invisible string. My hands turned the steering wheel, guiding the truck off the road and into the underbrush. The trees closed in around me, branches scratching against the metal like fingers trying to pull me out of the cab. I pushed deeper into the woods, the path unclear, my headlights casting eerie shadows that danced just out of sight. Suddenly, the truck lurched to a stop. I hit my head against the steering wheel, dazed. When I looked up, the girl was there again, inches from the windshield, her hollow eyes boring into mine. "Help me," she whispered, her voice a chilling mix of desperation and menace. I tried to speak, to ask her what she wanted, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself opening the truck door, stepping out into the cold night air. The ground felt unstable under my feet, like walking through a dream. She turned and began to walk deeper into the woods, and I followed, my mind screaming at me to turn back. The trees seemed to close in around us, the path becoming more treacherous with every step. Branches reached out, tugging at my clothes, scratching my skin. But still, I followed. We reached a clearing, the moonlight casting a pale glow over a small, dilapidated cabin. She stopped at the door, turning to look at me once more. Her eyes, though empty, pleaded with me. "Open it," she said, her voice echoing in the still air. I approached the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. The metal was icy cold, biting into my flesh. I turned it, and the door creaked open. The smell of decay hit me like a wave, making me gag. Inside, the shadows moved, restless. She pushed past me, entering the cabin. I hesitated, every instinct telling me to run, but curiosity and fear rooted me to the spot. I stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under my weight. The cabin was shrouded in darkness, the only light coming from the open door. She was nowhere to be seen, but I heard her whisper from the shadows, "Help me find it." "What?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. "The truth," she replied, her voice a sorrowful melody that seemed to resonate with the very walls of the cabin. I moved further into the darkness, my hands outstretched, feeling for anything that might give me a clue. My hand brushed against something cold, metallic. I grasped it, pulling it towards the light. It was a locket, old and tarnished. I opened it, revealing a photograph of a young woman, her unmistakably, though her eyes in the picture were bright, alive. My heart pounded as I looked from the photo to the dark corners of the cabin. "Is this yours?" No answer. The air grew colder, the darkness deepening. I turned back towards the door, only to find it had shut. I rushed to it, tugging at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in as I turned back to the room, the locket clenched in my fist. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices that filled the air. They were angry, desperate, mournful. I covered my ears, but the voices only grew louder. "You must find the truth," her voice rose above the rest, clear and commanding. I dropped to my knees, the locket falling from my hand. It hit the floor with a metallic clang, echoing through the cabin. The whispers stopped abruptly, the silence suffocating. I looked up, my breath visible in the cold air. The shadows seemed to watch me, waiting. I reached for the locket, opening it once more. This time, there was something else inside, a small, crumpled piece of paper. I unfolded it, the paper old and fragile in my hands. The writing was faded, but I could just make out the words, "Forgive me." The floor beneath me shook as the whispers returned, louder than before. The cabin trembled, the walls creaking ominously. I stood up, clutching the locket and the note. I needed to get out, to escape. But as I turned towards the door, it flung open, revealing not the woods I had come from, but a deeper darkness, a void that seemed to pull at my very soul. I took a step back, horror gripping me as I realized the truth might not be something I wanted to find. But it was too late. The darkness surged forward, engulfing me, pulling me into its depths. The last thing I heard was her voice, a mere whisper in the chaos, "Find me." And then, nothing but darkness. The void enveloped me completely, a darkness so absolute it felt almost tangible, pressing in on me from all sides. My breath echoed in the emptiness, a lone sound in an otherwise silent abyss. Panic clawed at my chest as I struggled to orient myself, but there was no up or down, no left or right in this place. Suddenly, a soft, eerie light flickered to life in the distance. It pulsed like a heartbeat, slow and rhythmic. Driven by a mix of fear and an inexplicable pull, I began moving towards it, each step cautious, my feet finding ground where it seemed there should be none. As I drew closer, the light grew brighter, revealing its source, a lantern, hanging from what appeared to be a gnarled branch of an immense, shadowy tree. Underneath the lantern stood the girl, her hollow eyes now glowing faintly in the dim light. She looked at me, her expression inscrutable. "Where are we?" I managed to croak, my voice sounding strange and distant. "You're in the realm of lost souls," she replied, her voice a whisper that seemed to echo around us. "This is where the forgotten come to linger, where secrets bind the air itself, where truth and despair intertwine." I glanced around, trying to see beyond the lantern's light, but the darkness resisted my gaze, an impenetrable wall of shadow. "Why am I here?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You carry a burden," she said, stepping closer. The ground beneath her didn't stir. She moved like a wisp of smoke, graceful and silent. "The locket you found, it's bound to this place, to the truth hidden in the shadows." I felt the locket in my pocket, its weight suddenly oppressive. "What truth?" I asked, though a part of me feared the answer. She reached out, her fingers cold as they brushed against mine, urging me to take out the locket. I obeyed, the metal cool and oddly comforting against my palm. "Open it," she whispered. I did as she asked, and this time, the photograph inside had changed. It no longer showed just her face. Now, there were two figures, her and an older man, his features stern and cold. "Who is he?" I asked, looking up at her. "My father," she replied, her voice a mix of sorrow and rage. "He built this place from the nightmares of others, from the souls he trapped here, including mine." A chill ran down my spine. "Trapped? Why?" "For power," she said, her eyes darkening. "For eternity. He wanted to conquer death, to bind souls to his will. He succeeded, but at a cost." "What cost?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. She pointed to the tree from which the lantern hung. As my eyes adjusted, I could see that what I had thought were branches were actually the twisted, contorted forms of countless people, their bodies merged with the bark, their faces etched with eternal screams of agony. "He used us," she said, her voice breaking. "Bound us to this tree, the tree of lost souls. We are the roots that feed his power, the screams that fill his nights." I stared at her, horror dawning. "And now he wants me?" "No," she shook her head. "You are here to end this. To free us." "Me? But how?" I was just a man, lost in a world beyond comprehension. "The locket," she said, pointing to it. "It binds him, too. Break it, and you break his hold over us." "But how do I break it?" I asked, feeling the weight of the task ahead. "Find the heart of the tree," she instructed, her gaze intense. "There, in its core, lies a blade forged from suffering and sorrow. Only it can sever the chains that bind the locket." I nodded, feeling the gravity of my mission. "Lead me," I said, my resolve hardening. She turned, drifting towards the dark heart of the tree. I followed, each step taking me deeper into the tangled roots and twisted limbs. The air grew colder, the screams of the trapped souls growing louder, filling the air with their despair. As we approached the center of the tree, the ground beneath our feet began to tremble. The air thickened, heavy with the stench of decay and the palpable weight of untold sorrows. The girl stopped, pointing to a spot where the tree's bark bulged outward, pulsating slightly as if it were breathing. "There," she said. "The heart." I stepped forward, the locket in my hand beginning to thrum with a power that felt both terrifying and divine. The bark before me split open, revealing a dark cavity within the tree. Inside, amidst a nest of roots and bones, lay a blade, its edge gleaming with an otherworldly light. I reached in, my hands trembling as I grasped the hilt. The blade felt right in my hand, a perfect extension of my will. I turned to her, a question in my eyes. "Do it," she urged, her voice steady despite the swirling chaos around us. "Free us all." With a deep breath, I lifted the blade, the locket held tightly in my other hand. I brought the blade down with all my strength, targeting the chain of the locket. The moment the blade touched the locket, a blinding light exploded around us. The screams of the souls reached a deafening crescendo, then cut off abruptly, replaced by a silence so profound it rang in my ears. As my vision cleared, I saw her standing before me, her eyes now filled with light, the hollows gone. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice clear and warm. But before I could respond, the ground shook violently, throwing me to my knees. A deep, angry voice boomed through the clearing, shaking the very air. "You dare defy me?" the voice thundered, filled with wrath and power. The tree began to twist and contort, its limbs reaching for us like the fingers of a vengeful god. I looked at her, fear gripping my heart. "What now?" "Now," she said, her eyes blazing with determination, "we fight." And as the shadows began to swirl around us, gathering form and fury, I knew this was only the beginning. The battle for the souls of the lost was just starting, and the darkness was far from defeated. The air around us became dense, heavy with the impending doom that crept closer with the writhing shadows. The voice, deep and resonating with centuries of anger and malice, boomed again, echoing through the twisted branches of the tree. "You will not escape. This is my domain." The ground beneath us cracked, roots twisting and turning like serpents underfoot. I clutched the blade tighter, its eerie glow a small beacon of hope in the overwhelming darkness. Beside me, the girl stood resolute, her newfound light casting divine shadows against the gnarled bark. "We must move," she shouted over the chaos, her hand grasping mine as she pulled me toward the heart of the turmoil. The tree's core pulsed violently, a dark heart beating with a sinister life of its own. As we approached, the air thickened further, almost tangible in its oppression. The whispers of 1,000 souls murmured through the leaves, their words intertwining into a cacophony of warnings and cries. "Free us," they pleaded, "end our torment." The central trunk of the tree split open, revealing a cavernous maw that seemed to breathe, exhaling a foul, decayed scent. The girl led me inside, the darkness enveloping us instantly, thicker than any night I had ever known. Inside the trunk, the air was alive with spectral energy. Ghostly lights flickered like fireflies, briefly illuminating the cavernous walls etched with ancient runes. The ground was a mosaic of bones and roots, intertwined in an eternal embrace. "This is it," she whispered, her voice echoing strangely in the enclosed space. "The heart of his power." The voice thundered once more, shaking the very air around us. "You dare breach my sanctum? You, a mortal, meddling in affairs beyond your comprehension? Ignoring the threats, she directed me to a spot where the roots converged into a dense knot, pulsing with a sickly green light. Strike here, she instructed, pointing with a steady hand. Break the seal. I raised the blade, its silver surface reflecting the eerie luminescence. With a deep breath, I brought it down with all my might, the impact sending a shockwave through the cavern. The light exploded outward, a radiant burst that seared my eyes. When the light dimmed, I blinked away the spots in my vision. The knot had split, a deep crack running through its center, from which a pure, white light emanated. The oppressive energy of the place began to wane, the air clearing as if a storm had passed. Quickly, before he regains control, she urged, her voice urgent. We moved closer to the fissure, the white light growing blinding. I could feel the pull, a magnetic force drawing the essence of the tree, the souls it had captured, into the light. The voice roared in fury, a sound so loud it was almost physical, pushing against us like a gale. No, you will not undo centuries of work. You will not. The tree convulsed, the cavern shaking as if in the throes of an earthquake. Roots lashed out like whips, sharp and deadly. We dodged them, moving with a desperate speed towards the heart of the light. As we reached the edge of the light, she turned to me, her eyes shining with tears and resolve. This is where I leave you, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. What? No, you can't. I protested, the thought of leaving her behind wrenching at my heart. I must stay, she said softly. My soul is bound to this place, to keep the balance once he's gone. But you must go back. Tell the stories, remember us. I grasped her hand, the warmth in stark contrast to the cold air. I won't forget, I promised, my voice thick with emotion. She smiled, a sad yet beautiful expression. I know. Pushing me gently into the light, she whispered, be brave. And then, she let go. The light enveloped me, a warmth that filled every crevice of my being. I felt as if I was floating, my body weightless, carried by the force of the light. The sounds of the tree, the roars of fury, faded into a distant echo. As I ascended, the last thing I saw was her figure, standing resolute against the darkness, a beacon of sacrifice and strength. Then, there was silence. I awoke to find myself on the side of Old Birch Road, the early morning light casting long shadows across the gravel. My truck sat a few feet away, untouched, as if none of the night's horrors had ever occurred. Shaking, I stood, my legs unsteady. Glancing around, I saw no sign of the dark woods, the malevolent tree, or the tortured souls. It was just the road, quiet and seemingly peaceful. But the locket was still in my hand, warm and pulsing with a light of its own. I opened it, half expecting to see her face, but it was empty, just a hollow case with traces of the fight we had fought. Climbing into the truck, I turned the key, the engine coming to life with a comforting rumble. I drove away from Old Birch Road, the rearview mirror reflecting only the road behind me. As the miles passed, her words echoed in my mind, remember us. And I knew that though I had left the realm of lost souls, the journey was far from over. The story, our story, was still unfolding, the truths I carried now a burden and a mission. And somewhere, in the back of my mind, I felt the stirrings of the darkness, a reminder that the fight against the night was never truly done. The road stretched out before me, winding and endless, leading me back into the world, but the shadows of what I had experienced clung tightly, a constant companion as I drove into the dawn. As I drove away from Old Birch Road, the dawn painted the sky in strokes of pink and orange, a stark contrast to the darkness I had left behind. The air felt lighter, as if the world itself had exhaled a long-held breath of relief. Yet, the weight of the locket in my hand and the memories it contained bore down on me, a constant reminder of the night's surreal horrors. The road home was long, giving me too much time to think, to remember her face, the sorrow, the resignation, and the fleeting moment of peace when she pushed me into the light. It seemed impossible, like a dream, but the locket was undeniably real, as was the lingering coldness in my bones. I stopped for coffee at a small diner just off the highway, the mundane normalcy of the place clashing with the storm inside me. The waitress gave me a kind smile as she poured a steaming cup, her eyes briefly flicking to the locket which I had placed on the table. "Interesting piece," she remarked, nodding at the locket. I wrapped my fingers around it, feeling its warmth. "It's got a lot of history," I replied, the understatement making my chest tighten. "Looks like it," she said, before moving off to attend to another customer. Alone with my thoughts again, I pondered what to do next. The girl's last request echoed in my mind, "Remember us." But how do you share a story like this? How do you warn the world of a darkness so profound, a sacrifice so great, and a battle that might never fully be won? After the diner, the drive home felt automatic, my mind elsewhere, grappling with the enormity of it all. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the familiarity of my surroundings did little to ease the unease that clung to me. Inside, I went straight to my old writing desk, the locket still in hand. I sat down, opened my laptop, and began to write. The words poured out, almost as if they were being dictated by a force beyond myself. I wrote about the dark road, the girl, the tree of lost souls, the battle against the darkness, and the unspeakable choices made. Hours passed unnoticed until the document was complete, a full account of everything I had experienced. I leaned back in my chair, exhausted but determined. The next steps were clear. I needed to share this story, to ensure her sacrifice and the plight of those souls weren't in vain. The following weeks were a blur of activity. I contacted an old friend who worked in publishing, someone I trusted implicitly. When I showed him the manuscript, he read it in silence, his face growing paler with each page. Once finished, he looked up at me, his eyes wide. "This is incredible and terrifying. Are you sure about this?" I nodded. "It's what I have to do." The publication process was expedited given the urgency I felt, and soon the story was out in the world, available for anyone brave enough to read it. The reactions were immediate and varied: skepticism, fear, fascination. The story spread, a viral phenomenon that ignited conversations about the supernatural and the unseen battles fought in the shadows. But I knew my role in this story wasn't over. The locket was still with me, warm and occasionally pulsing with a light that no one else seemed to see. I understood then that my connection to that other realm wasn't severed when I left. It had changed, become a part of me. I started to receive messages from others who had experienced similar phenomena, those who had felt the touch of the supernatural and didn't know where to turn. The story had opened a door for them, a way to share and make sense of their experiences. It became clear that my journey was not just about sharing a story but about building a community, a place for those touched by the dark to feel understood and supported. Months turned into years, and the community grew. We shared stories, supported each other, and looked for ways to protect ourselves from the darkness that lurked just out of sight. I became a guardian of sorts, a keeper of tales, a role I never expected but now embraced fully. And every year, on the anniversary of that fateful night, I returned to Old Birch Road. The road was quieter now, the darkness less oppressive. Each time, I walked to the spot where the road had diverged, where I had stepped into another realm, and I left flowers, white lilies, her favorite, I had learned from one of the many souls I had helped free. Standing there, in the quiet twilight, I could almost hear her voice, a whisper on the wind, thanking me. I would close my eyes, take a deep breath, and whisper back, "No, thank you for everything." The darkness never truly left, it was always there, at the edge of my vision, in the periphery of our lives. But now we faced it together, armed with knowledge and united by our shared experiences. And through it all, the locket remained by my side, a beacon of light in the ever-present shadow, a reminder that even in the deepest darkness, there can be light. As the sun set, casting long shadows across Old Birch Road, I turned back to my truck, ready to leave but never to forget. The road home was long, but I knew it well. And as I drove, the locket glowed softly against the twilight, a guiding light in the encroaching night.